he was standing there in the shadows when she whispered to her friend. That greedy bastard Kane wouldn't notice if his own mother was scrubbing these floors. All he cares about is his next million. And Alexander Kane, billionaire CEO disguised as a janitor, felt his carefully constructed world shatter with those 23 words. The marble floors of Kane Industries' executive suite gleamed under the soft morning light filtering through floor-to-ceiling windows. Alexander Kane stood at the panoramic view of downtown Chicago, his reflection ghost-like against the glass. A man who owned half the skyline but couldn't shake the hollow ache in his chest. "The quarterly projections are exceptional, Mr. Kane," his assistant Patricia chirped from behind an iPad, her voice as polished as the chrome fixtures surrounding them. "Profits are up 37%, and the board is ecstatic about the new cost-cutting measures." Alex's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Cost-cutting measures. Layoffs, actually. 800 families who'd wake up unemployed because numbers on a spreadsheet demanded it. He'd signed the papers without blinking, the way he'd been trained since childhood. Business was business. Emotions were liabilities. "Schedule the press conference for Friday," he said, his voice carrying the authority that had built an empire. "And cancel dinner with the Morgans. I have work to finish." Patricia nodded, already typing. Another social obligation avoided, another evening spent alone in his penthouse, surrounded by awards and accolades that felt increasingly meaningless. At 35, Alexander Kane had everything money could buy and nothing that mattered. His phone buzzed. A text from his ex-fiancée, Vivian. "Saw the Forbes article. Congrats on the profit margins. Call me when you're ready to stop playing hermit." He deleted it without responding. The problem wasn't loneliness, Alex told himself as he adjusted his $1,000 tie. The problem was authenticity. Every smile directed at him came with a price tag. Every conversation carried an agenda. Every woman who professed to love him had first Googled his net worth. He'd built walls so high that even he couldn't see over them anymore. 23 floors below, Isabella Rodriguez pushed her cleaning cart through the maze of cubicles, humming softly to herself, despite the weight of exhaustion pressing down on her shoulders. The night shift at Kane Industries paid better than her previous 3 jobs combined, but it meant she hadn't seen her 8-year-old daughter Sophia awake in 2 weeks. "Mommy, why can't you work when normal people work?" Sophia had asked over breakfast that morning, her dark eyes wide with confusion that pierced Isabella's heart like glass. "Because normal people don't need us to make their world clean and pretty," Isabella had whispered, kissing Sophia's forehead before handing her off to Mrs. Chen next door. "But we're important too, mi amor. Don't ever forget that." Now, as she wiped down desks where people earned more in an hour than she made in a month, Isabella reminded herself of those words. She was important. She mattered. Even if the man whose name was emblazoned in gold letters throughout the building would never know she existed. Her phone vibrated. A text from the pharmacy. "Sophia's asthma medication is ready. Total $347.82. Payment required at pickup." Isabella's stomach dropped. The prescription that kept her daughter breathing cost more than she'd make this entire week. She'd already borrowed from her sister Maria twice this month, already skipped her own meals to stretch the grocery budget. Pride warred with desperation as she stared at the message. "Girl, you look like someone just told you Christmas was canceled," her friend Keisha called from across the room, pushing her own cart laden with supplies. Isabella quickly pocketed her phone. "Just tired, that's all." But it wasn't just tiredness. It was the bone-deep weariness of a woman who worked 2 jobs and still couldn't afford her child's medicine. It was the frustration of watching executives leave half-eaten $40 lunches on their desks while she survived on gas station coffee and determination. Most of all, it was the anger at a system where men like Alexander Kane, who'd never worked a day in his life, according to the business magazine she'd glimpsed, make millions while people like her scraped together quarters for school lunches. She'd never met the man, had only seen his portrait hanging in the lobby like some kind of corporate deity, but she knew his type. rich, entitled, completely disconnected from the reality of ordinary people's struggles. The kind of man who inherited wealth and convinced himself he'd earned it. "Isabella," called Marcus, the night shift supervisor, appearing around a corner with his clipboard. "I need you to cover the executive floors tonight. Janet called in sick." Isabella's heart sunk. The executive floors meant working alone, meant longer hours, meant being even more invisible than usual in a building where she was already a ghost. "No problem, Marcus," she said, forcing a smile. As the elevator climbed toward the upper floors, Isabella thought about Sophia, probably already asleep by now, hopefully not wheezing. She thought about the medication sitting at the pharmacy like a ransom note. She thought about Alexander Kane in his ivory tower, making decisions that affected thousands of lives without ever having to look those people in the eye. The elevator doors opened onto the executive floor's hushed elegance, and Isabella stepped into a world that might as well have been another planet. Here, even the trash cans were probably worth more than her monthly rent. She began her work methodically, muscles moving through familiar motions while her mind wandered to escape plans that never quite materialized. Community college classes she couldn't afford, better jobs that required experience she didn't have, a future that seemed perpetually out of reach. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was literally cleaning up after the American dream while being unable to achieve it herself. But Isabella Rodriguez was nothing if not a survivor. She'd raised Sophia alone since she was 19, had worked her way up from 3 part-time jobs to 2 steady ones, and had never once accepted charity, even when pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. She would figure this out. She always did. Even if it meant swallowing that pride and asking her sister for another loan. Even if it meant working until her hands bled and her back screamed in protest. Even if it meant existing in the shadows of a world that would never see her as more than invisible hands that made their lives more comfortable. Tomorrow, she would find a way to pay for Sophia's medicine. Tonight, she would clean Alexander Kane's world until it sparkled, never knowing that the man himself was about to step into hers. What walls have you built in your life that protect you but also isolate you from authentic connection? Like this story if you've ever felt invisible in a world that seems designed for someone else, and share your thoughts about the masks we wear to survive. What would happen if we dared to be truly seen? 3 weeks later, Alexander Kane pushed a janitor's cart through the same corridors where his portrait hung in gilded frames. The navy work coveralls felt foreign against his skin, the name tag reading Alex Miller, a strange weight on his chest. His hands, soft from a lifetime of signing documents rather than scrubbing floors, were already raw from the industrial cleaning solutions. This wasn't how billionaire CEOs typically spent their evenings, but desperation made men do extraordinary things. The idea had come to him during a sleepless night after reading yet another scathing review on Glassdoor. Kane treats his employees like disposable machines. He's completely out of touch with reality. The words had haunted him, especially because deep down, he feared they were true. So, he'd done something unprecedented. He'd asked Marcus, the night shift supervisor, for a job. A temporary position, he'd said, paying cash, no questions asked. Marcus, desperate for extra help during flu season, had hired Alex Miller on the spot. Now, 3 weeks into his undercover experiment, Alex was learning things no board meeting had ever taught him. Like how the break room coffee tasted like burnt tar, how the fluorescent lights hummed with a headache-inducing frequency, and how invisible the night shift workers were to the day staff who walked past them like they were furniture. He was also learning about Isabella Rodriguez. She worked with a quiet efficiency that mesmerized him, humming Spanish lullabies under her breath as she moved through the offices. Her laugh, when Keisha or one of the other cleaners said something funny, was like music in the sterile corporate environment. But it was her gentleness that caught him off guard. The way she carefully straightened family photos on executives' desks, how she never threw away the wilting plants other cleaners ignored, watering them with leftover coffee instead. Alex found himself timing his routes to cross paths with her, inventing reasons to work in adjacent areas. She'd nod politely when they passed, sometimes offering a small smile that made his chest tight with an unfamiliar warmth. Tonight felt different. Isabella seemed distracted, her usual humming replaced by worried silence. She checked her phone obsessively, each glance followed by a deeper frown. "Hey," Alex said softly, as they found themselves alone in the executive break room. "You okay?" Isabella looked up, surprised. In 3 weeks, the quiet janitor had barely spoken beyond polite greetings. Tonight, something in his voice, genuine concern, instead of idle curiosity, made her pause. "My daughter," she said, then immediately looked embarrassed for sharing. "She's been having trouble breathing. Asthma. The medicine is—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "Sorry, you don't need to hear about my problems." "How old is she?" Alex asked, abandoning his pretense of cleaning to face her fully. 8. Isabella's voice softened immediately, the way it always did when she talked about Sophia. "She's the smartest kid you've ever seen. Wants to be a doctor when she grows up. Says she's going to find a cure for asthma so other kids don't have to feel like they're drowning." The pride in her voice was so pure, so fierce, that Alex felt something crack inside his chest. When was the last time someone had spoken about him with even half that much love? "That's incredible," he said. "She sounds amazing." "She is." Isabella's smile was radiant for a moment before worry clouded it again. "I just wish I could give her everything she deserves. Every child should be able to breathe without their mother having to choose between medicine and rent." The words hit Alex like a physical blow. Here was a woman working nights to afford her daughter's medication, while he sat in board meetings discussing profit margins and cost-cutting measures. The disconnect was staggering. "What do you think about Kane?" Alex asked suddenly, the question spilling out before he could stop it. "The CEO, I mean." Isabella's expression shifted, her jaw tightening. "Why?" "Just curious. He's in the news a lot." For a moment, Isabella studied Alex's face as if trying to read something there. Then she turned back to her cleaning, her movements sharp with suppressed anger. "Men like Alexander Kane," she said finally, "they live in a different world. They make decisions that affect thousands of people, but they never have to see the consequences. They never have to choose between their child's medicine and keeping the lights on." Alex's hand stilled on his cleaning rag. This was it, the moment of truth he'd been both craving and dreading. Isabella continued, her voice growing more passionate. "I bet he's never worked a day in his life, never worried about making rent, never had to explain to his kid why they can't have the same things as their classmates. He sits in his ivory tower making millions while people like us," she gestured around the empty break room, "we're invisible to him." Each word was a scalpel, cutting away the comfortable lies Alex had told himself about being a fair employer, about caring for his workforce. The woman he was falling for, because yes, he was falling, hard and fast and completely, saw him as everything wrong with the world. "Maybe," Alex said carefully, "maybe he doesn't know. Maybe if someone told him—" "Told him what?" Isabella's laugh was bitter. "That his employees can't afford their children's medicine? That we work 2 jobs and still can't make ends meet? You think he'd care? Men like that, they only care about their bottom line." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken truths. Alex felt exposed, raw, as if she'd somehow seen through his disguise to the man beneath. The irony was devastating. He'd found exactly what he'd been searching for his entire adult life, a woman who saw beyond wealth and status, who cared about substance over surface. And she despised everything he represented. "I should get back to work," Isabella said quietly, perhaps sensing she'd said too much to a stranger. As she walked away, Alex remained frozen in place, her words echoing in his mind like an accusation. For the first time in his privileged life, he was seeing himself through someone else's eyes, someone who mattered, someone whose opinion he desperately wanted to change. But how could he earn the love of a woman who had every reason to hate him? The question would haunt him for the rest of the night and many nights to come. Have you ever discovered that others see you completely differently from how you see yourself? How did that revelation change you?
Comment below if you've ever felt the sting of brutal honesty that forced you to confront uncomfortable truths about yourself. Sometimes the people who challenge us most are exactly who we need to become better. Alexander couldn't sleep. For 3 days, Isabella's words echoed in his mind like a verdict he couldn't appeal. That greedy bastard Kane wouldn't notice if his own mother was scrubbing these floors. He sat in his penthouse office at 3 a.m., surrounded by financial reports and employee files, trying to convince himself she was wrong. The numbers didn't lie. Kane Industries was more profitable than ever. Stock prices had soared. Shareholders were ecstatic. But every time he looked at the layoff statistics, he saw Isabella's face. 800 families. 800 people who probably had daughters like Sophia, who needed medicine they couldn't afford. His phone buzzed with a text from his brother David. "Heard you've been MIA from the social circuit. Mom's worried. Call her." He deleted it. How could he explain that he'd been working nights as a janitor, that he'd fallen for a woman who hated everything he represented? They'd have him committed. The rational thing would be to end this charade, go back to his real life, forget about Isabella Rodriguez and her brutal honesty. But every time he considered it, he remembered the way she'd smiled when she introduced herself, the fierce pride in her voice when she talked about Sophia. He was Alexander Kane. He didn't run from problems. He acquired them, restructured them, made them profitable. But Isabella wasn't a business challenge. She was a woman who saw straight through to his soul and found it wanting. Meanwhile, 23 floors below, Isabella was having her own crisis of faith. She'd been thinking about Al Martinez for 3 days straight, which was ridiculous. She barely knew him. One conversation with a new coworker shouldn't have her distracted during every waking moment. But there had been something different about him. The way he'd really listened when she talked about Sophia, the genuine concern in his eyes when she mentioned the medication costs. Most people glazed over when single mothers started talking about their struggles, as if poverty was contagious. "Girl, you're polishing that same spot for the 5th time," Keisha observed, wheeling up her cart beside Isabella's. "What's got you so twisted up?" "Nothing," I lied, moving to the next desk. "Just tired." This wouldn't have anything to do with that fine new janitor, would it?" Isabella's cheeks burned. I don't know what you're talking about." "The one who's been asking Marcus about your schedule? The one who somehow always ends up working the same floors as you?" Isabella's heart stuttered. "He's been asking about my schedule? Honey, that man is smitten. Question is, what are you going to do about it?" "Nothing," Isabella told herself firmly. I had no time for complications, especially not with a coworker. My life was already balanced on a knife's edge. One missed shift, one unexpected expense, and everything would come crashing down. Besides, she'd learned long ago not to trust her heart when it came to men. Sophia's father had taught her that lesson well before he disappeared when she was 7 months pregnant. "I'm not going to do anything about it," Isabella said firmly. "I can't afford to." But even as she said it, she found herself hoping Al would be working their floor again tonight. At Kane Industries' weekly board meeting, Alexander sat at the head of the polished table, listening to his executives discuss quarterly projections with the enthusiasm of vultures circling carrion. "The cleaning staff cuts are showing excellent results," CFO Margaret Walsh announced, clicking through her presentation. "We've reduced night shift personnel by 15% while maintaining service standards." Alexander's pen snapped in his grip. 15%?
Yes, sir. Mostly through increased efficiency requirements and elimination of redundant positions. Redundant positions. Like Isabella was redundant. Like her struggle to afford her daughter's medication was just a line item in someone's cost-benefit analysis. What about the employee satisfaction surveys Patricia mentioned? Margaret's smile faltered slightly. Well, there have been some complaints, but that's to be expected during any restructuring period. What kind of complaints? The room grew uncomfortable. Board members shifted in their seats, suddenly fascinated by their tablets. Nothing significant, Margaret said dismissively. Some grumbling about workload increases, benefit reductions, standard resistance to change. Alexander stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. I want to see those surveys, all of them. Sir? The actual surveys, not summaries, not executive briefs, the raw data. Margaret exchanged glances with the other board members. Mr. Kane, I'm not sure that's the best use of your get them to me by the end of business today. Alexander strode out of the boardroom, leaving behind a wake of confused murmurs. In the elevator, he loosened his tie, feeling like he was suffocating in his own skin. His phone rang. Patricia's extension. Sir, your lunch with the Hendersons is in 30 minutes. Cancel it. Sir? Cancel everything today. I need to think. But thinking was dangerous territory. Every thought led back to Isabella, to the gap between who he thought he was and who she saw him as. The worst part wasn't that she was wrong about him. It was that she might be right. That night, Isabella arrived at work to find a small gift bag on her cleaning cart. Inside was a children's inhaler and a note. From a friend who believes every child deserves to breathe easy, Al. Her hands shook as she held Sophia's medication, the same prescription that had been sitting at the pharmacy for a week, the one she couldn't afford. $347.82 worth of medicine, just sitting in a paper bag like it was nothing. Tears blurred her vision. No one had ever done something like this for her, not without wanting something in return. But this felt different. This felt like kindness for its own sake, and Isabella didn't know how to process that. In her world, there was always a catch, always a price to pay. She found Al in the executive break room, restocking coffee supplies with unnecessary concentration. I can't accept this, she said quietly, holding out the bag. He looked up, and something flickered across his face. Disappointment? Relief. Why not? Because I don't know what you want from me. The words hung between them like an accusation. Al set down the coffee pods and turned to face her fully. I don't want anything, he said, and his voice carried a weight that made Isabella's chest tighten. I have a daughter too, hypothetically, and I'd want someone to help her if she needed it. You have a daughter? Isabella's defensive walls wavered slightly. No, Al said quickly, then seemed to struggle with something internal. I mean, not yet. Someday, maybe, if I ever figure out how to be the kind of man who deserves one. There was such raw pain in his voice that Isabella found herself stepping closer. Al. Keep it, he said urgently. Please. For Sophia. Not for me, not for anything I might want, just because she needs it, and I can help. Isabella stared at him, searching his face for deception, for ulterior motives, for the catch she knew had to be there somewhere. But all she saw was genuine concern and something else, something that looked like hope. Why? She whispered. Because sometimes, Al said softly, helping someone else is the only way to help yourself. Isabella clutched the bag to her chest, her carefully constructed walls crumbling just a little. She didn't understand this man, didn't understand his motivations or his mysterious ability to afford expensive medications on a janitor's salary. But for the first time in years, she was willing to try.
What happens when someone's kindness challenges your deepest beliefs about human nature and self-protection? Share if you've ever received unexpected kindness from a stranger that changed your perspective on trust and vulnerability. The elevator shuddered to a halt between the 15th and 16th floors at 2:47 a.m., trapping Alexander and Isabella in a space no bigger than a closet. The emergency lighting cast everything in an amber glow, and the sudden silence felt deafening after the gentle hum of machinery. "Well, this is just perfect," Isabella muttered, pressing the emergency button repeatedly. Nothing happened except a hollow clicking sound that seemed to mock their situation. "I swear, if I miss picking up Sophia's medicine because of this—" Alexander watched her face cycle through frustration, worry, and finally resignation. It had been 3 days since her brutal assessment of his character, 3 days of him showing up to work the night shift while wrestling with the terrible possibility that she might be right about everything. "Hey," he said softly, surprised by the gentleness in his own voice. "We'll get out of here. Security will notice the elevator's down." "Will they?" Isabella slumped against the wall, suddenly looking exhausted. "Half the security cameras on this floor don't even work. Marcus has been filing reports for months, but apparently fixing them isn't in the budget." Another cut, another cost-saving measure that Alexander probably approved without thinking about the human consequences. He felt the familiar twist of shame in his gut. "Tell me about Sophia," he said, desperate to change the subject and genuinely wanting to know. "What's she like?" Isabella's entire expression transformed, the worry lines smoothing into something radiant. God, where do I start? She's 8 going on 30, you know? Yesterday, she told me that when she grows up, she wants to be a doctor so she can fix her own breathing problems. Can you imagine? 8 years old and already thinking about how to solve her own medical issues. Alexander's chest tightened. She sounds incredible. She is. She's also stubborn as hell, just like her mama. Last week, she asked me why some kids at school have brand new everything while she has to wear hand-me-downs from her cousin. How do you explain economic inequality to an 8-year-old without crushing her spirit? What did you tell her? I told her that having less stuff doesn't make her less valuable, that her worth isn't measured by what she owns, but by how she treats people and how hard she's willing to work for her dreams. Isabella's voice caught slightly. But sometimes I wonder if I'm lying to her, if I'm setting her up for disappointment in a world that really does judge you by what you have. Alexander had never heard wealth and poverty discussed with such raw honesty. In his world, money was abstract. Numbers on screens, quarterly reports, investment portfolios. But listening to Isabella, he began to understand that money was oxygen for people like her. The difference between her daughter breathing easily and struggling for each breath. "You're not lying to her," he said quietly. "Character matters more than cash." Isabella looked at him with surprise. "That's not what most people believe. Maybe most people are wrong." They fell into silence, and Alexander became acutely aware of how small the space was, how close they were sitting. He could smell Isabella's shampoo, something simple and clean, not the expensive perfumes he was used to. He could see the tiny scar on her chin, probably from childhood, and the way she unconsciously touched a small gold cross at her throat when she was worried. "Can I ask you something?" Isabella said suddenly. "What made you take this job? You don't seem like, you talk differently than most of the guys who end up in janitorial." "Different how?" "Like, you've had options in life. Like cleaning offices wasn't your only choice." Isabella studied his face in the dim light. "There's something about you that doesn't quite fit."
She sees me. He realized with a jolt that was equal parts terror and exhilaration. Even disguised, even lying about his identity, something essential about him was shining through. It should have been alarming, but instead it felt like the first honest recognition he'd received in years. "Maybe I'm just good at pretending," he said carefully. Or maybe you're pretending to be someone you're not." The words hung between them like a challenge. Alexander felt the weight of his deception pressing down on him, heavier than the stalled elevator around them. Here was a woman who trusted him with her fears about her daughter, her struggles with poverty, her dreams for a better life, and he was lying to her about the most fundamental fact of his existence. "Isabella," he began, not sure what he was going to say. "Izzy," she corrected softly. "My friends call me Izzy." Friends. The word hit him like a gift he didn't deserve. When was the last time someone had considered him a friend without knowing his net worth first? "Izzy," he repeated, loving the way her name felt in his mouth. "Can I tell you something?" She nodded, and in the amber emergency lighting, she looked like something from a Renaissance painting, all golden skin and dark eyes and quiet strength. "I've never met anyone like you," he said, the words emerging before he could stop them. "You're the most real person I've ever known." Isabella's breath caught. "Ow. I mean it. You're honest and brave and kind, and you work harder than anyone should have to just to take care of the people you love. That's not nothing. That's everything." "You don't know me," she whispered, but there was something vulnerable in her voice. "I know enough. I know you hum when you work because it makes the time pass faster. I know you always make sure the conference room windows are spotless because you think people should be able to see clearly when they're making important decisions. I know you skip lunch, but you never complain about being hungry. You've been watching me?" There was no accusation in her tone, only curiosity. "I've been noticing you," Alexander admitted. "It's impossible not to." The space between them seemed to shrink. Isabella was looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read, surprise, confusion, and something that might have been hope. "This is crazy," she murmured. "I don't even know your last name." "Martinez," he lied automatically, hating himself for it. "Al Martinez," she repeated slowly. "Why does that feel like another costume you're wearing?" Before he could answer, the elevator lurched back to life with a mechanical groan. The lights flickered back to normal and the gentle hum of movement returned. They were both startled by the sudden change, the spell of intimacy broken by the return of the outside world. "Looks like we're free," Isabella said, but she didn't sound entirely happy about it. Neither was Alexander. In that small, amber-lit space, he'd felt more like himself than he had in years. Not the CEO, not the billionaire, not the man with all the answers and none of the connections. Just a man talking to a woman who saw something worth knowing in him. The elevator dinged as they reached the ground floor, and Isabella gathered her cleaning supplies with practiced efficiency. "Izzy," Alexander called as she stepped into the hallway. She turned back, and in the harsh fluorescent lighting of the corridor, the magic of their trapped time felt fragile, like something that might evaporate if examined too closely. "Thank you," he said, "for trusting me with your stories." Isabella smiled, and it was like sunrise. "Thank you for listening, Al Martinez. Most people don't." As she walked away, pushing her cart toward the service elevator, Alexander stood frozen in the empty lobby. He was in completely uncharted territory, falling for a woman who would hate him if she knew the truth, but who might be the only person capable of seeing who he really was beneath all the lies he'd built his life around. The proximity had forced something between them, something real and precious and terrifying. Now the question was whether he dared to nurture it or had the wisdom to let it go before he destroyed them both. Have you ever felt more yourself when pretending to be someone else? What does that reveal about the masks you wear daily? Share this if you've ever been trapped in a situation that forced you to confront uncomfortable truths about yourself and others. The photograph fell from Isabella's trembling fingers, floating to the floor like a feather carrying the weight of her world. Alexander, her Al, the man who'd made her laugh until her sides ached, who'd shared his sandwich when she'd forgotten lunch, who'd listened to her dreams with eyes that made her feel seen for the first time in years, stared back at her from the glossy pages of Forbes magazine. Alexander Kane, 35, CEO of Kane Industries. Net worth, $12.7 billion.
"No," she whispered to the empty break room, her voice echoing off industrial walls that suddenly felt like a prison. No, no, no. But the evidence was undeniable. The same storm-gray eyes that had looked at her with such tenderness, the same strong jaw she'd imagined kissing, the same hands that had touched hers with reverence, were now revealed as the hands that had signed 800 layoff notices. Her phone buzzed. A text from Alexander. "Can we talk tonight? There's something I need to tell you." Isabella's laugh was bitter, broken. Something he needed to tell her, like it was a minor detail he'd forgotten to mention, not a complete reconstruction of reality. She sank into a plastic chair, the magazine still open in her lap, and let the memories crash over her like waves. 2 weeks ago, in this same break room. "You ever think about what you'd do if you won the lottery?" Al had asked, unwrapping a sandwich that looked suspiciously gourmet for a janitor's lunch. "Honestly?" Isabella had laughed, exhaustion making her giddy. "I'd pay for Sophia's medicine without having to choose between that and groceries, maybe get her into that art program she keeps talking about. Nothing fancy, just breathing room." Al's face had gone soft, almost pained. "What about you? Just for you?" The question had caught her off guard. When was the last time someone had asked what she wanted for herself, separate from her daughter? "I don't know," she admitted quietly. "I guess I'd like to finish my degree. Always wanted to be a teacher, but life got in the way. Sophia came first, work came first, everything came first." She looked at him then, really looked at him. "What about you? What would Al Martinez do with lottery money?" "I'd try to become the kind of man worth loving." He said it, his voice so low she almost missed it. "The kind of man who deserves someone like you." The memory made her stomach clench with betrayal so sharp it felt physical. He'd been playing a role, testing her like some kind of social experiment. How had he seen her confession about not being able to afford her daughter's medication? As entertainment? Research for his next board meeting about employee satisfaction? Isabella's phone rang. Alexander's name, still saved as Al Hart because she'd been too caught up in fairy tales to think straight, flashed on the screen. She answered on the fourth ring, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "Hello, Mr. Kane?" The silence on the other end stretched so long she wondered if he'd hung up. "Isabella, no." The word came out sharp, final. "You don't get to call me that anymore. You lost that right when you decided to turn my life undercover fantasy." "It wasn't like that." His voice was raw, desperate. "Please, just let me explain." "What explain?" "How you lied to me for 3 weeks? How you sat there and listened to me talk about not being able to afford my daughter's medication while you're worth $12 billion? How you let me pour my heart out about being invisible to rich people when you are the rich people?" "I never meant for it to go this far." The words came out in a rush. It started as, I don't know what it started as, curiosity maybe, desperation. But then I met you and you were so real, so genuine, and I'd never felt anything like what I felt when I was with you. Stop. Isabella's voice cracked. Just stop. You know what the really pathetic part is? I was falling for you. Actually falling for someone for the first time since Sophia's father left. I thought maybe someone could see past the uniforms and the exhaustion and the constant worry about money and just see me. "I do see you," Alexander said, his voice breaking. "Isabella, I see you more clearly than I've ever seen anyone. These past 3 weeks with you have been the most real, most honest weeks of my entire life." "Honest? You want to talk about honesty? Let me tell you what honesty looks like. Honest is working 2 jobs and still not being able to afford your kid's asthma inhaler. Honest is falling asleep standing because you're so tired you can't see straight. Honesty is believing that maybe, just maybe,
Someone could love you for who you are instead of what you can do for them. Isabella, please.
I told you things, she whispered, her composure finally cracking completely. I told you about Sophia's father leaving when he found out I was pregnant. I told you about growing up in foster care, about never having anyone who stayed. I told you about feeling invisible, about wondering if I'd ever matter to anyone. The silence on the other end was deafening. Did you know? Her voice was barely audible. When I was talking about hating my greedy bastard boss, did you know it was you? Yes, Alexander whispered, and the single word carried the weight of his guilt. Yes, I knew. Isabella closed her eyes, the confirmation hitting her like a physical blow. And you just stood there, let me keep talking, keep embarrassing myself, while you probably thought it was hilarious. I thought my heart was going to stop, he said quietly. Hearing you say those things, it destroyed me, Isabella, because I realized you were right about all of it. I had become exactly what you said I was. So this whole thing was what? Your redemption arc? You figured you'd slum it with the help, see how the other half lives, maybe write a book about it? No! The word exploded from him. God, no. Isabella, I know how this looks. I know you have every right to hate me, but what happened between us, that was real. More real than anything I've ever experienced. Real for you, maybe. Isabella wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. For me, it was just another lie from another man who couldn't tell me the truth. She could hear him crying now, quiet sobs that might have moved her if her heart wasn't already shattered. I want to make this right, he said finally. You can't. Isabella stood up, the magazine sliding off her lap. You can't make this right, Alexander. You can't undo the lie. You can't give me back the trust I wasted on you. And you sure as hell can't give me back the stupid, naive hope I had that someone might actually love me for me. I do love you, he whispered, for exactly who you are. No, Isabella said, her voice finally steady. You love who you think I am, the noble, struggling single mother, the pure-hearted working-class hero. But you don't love Isabella Rodriguez. You love your idea of her. She ended the call and turned off her phone, sitting alone in the break room where everything had started, where Al Martinez had first smiled at her and made her believe in possibilities. But Al Martinez had never existed. He'd been a costume Alexander Kane put on to play pretend. And Isabella Rodriguez, who had survived foster care and teen pregnancy and grinding poverty, wasn't sure she'd survive having her heart broken by a man who wasn't even real. Have you ever discovered that someone you trusted was living a lie? How did you find the strength to rebuild your ability to trust? Comment if you've ever felt like someone loved their idea of you rather than who you really are. How do we learn to see the difference between fantasy and authentic love? 2 weeks had passed since that devastating night in the conference room, and Alexander found himself living for the moments when Isabella's face would light up at seeing him. Tonight was different, though. Tonight, she looked fragile, like glass holding back a storm. Sophia had another attack yesterday, she said quietly, as they worked side by side in his own office. The irony wasn't lost on him. Spent 4 hours in the emergency room. They want to change her medication to something stronger, but she trailed off, her voice catching. But Alexander prompted gently, though he suspected he knew the answer. But it cost $800 a month. Even with the insurance through here, I'd have to come up with $400. Isabella's laugh was hollow. Might as well be $4 million. Alexander's hand stilled on the desk he was wiping. In his wallet right now, he had more cash than Isabella would see in 6 months. The impulse to help was overwhelming, but Al Martinez couldn't afford to casually hand over hundreds of dollars without raising suspicions. There has to be something, he said, his voice tight with helpless frustration.
There is. Isabella's voice was barely a whisper. My sister Maria offered to help, but she's already struggling with her own kids. And there's this program for single mothers, but it requires me to admit I can't take care of my own child. The shame in her voice was unbearable. Alexander wanted to pull her into his arms, to tell her that needing help didn't make her weak, it made her human. Instead, he set down his spray bottle and turned to face her fully. Izzy, look at me. She raised her eyes, and the vulnerability there nearly brought him to his knees.
You are the strongest person I've ever met, he said, meaning every word. You work 2 jobs, you're raising an amazing daughter, and you do it all with grace and dignity. Asking for help when you need it isn't failure, it's love. It's putting Sophia first, which is what a good mother does. Tears spilled over, and before he could think about the consequences, Alexander closed the distance between them and pulled her into his arms. She fit perfectly against his chest, her body shaking with silent sobs that she'd probably been holding back for weeks. I'm so tired, Al, she whispered against his shirt. I'm so tired of being strong all the time. Then don't be. Not right now. Not with me. They stood like that in the dim office lighting, holding each other while the city sparkled beyond the windows. Alexander had held countless women, but never like this. Never with this desperate need to protect, to shelter, to take away pain. This wasn't about desire or conquest. This was about love, pure and terrifying and completely outside his experience. Tell me about Sophia, he said softly, his lips against her hair. Tell me something that makes you smile. Isabella pulled back slightly, wiping her eyes but staying in his arms. She wants to be a scientist. Last week she spent 3 hours trying to figure out why soap bubbles are round. When I couldn't explain it, she said, "That's okay, Mommy. You're smart about love things. I'll be smart about science things, and together we'll know everything." Alexander's chest constricted. She sounds incredible. She is. Sometimes I think she's too good for this world, you know? Too pure. I want to protect that innocence, but I also need to prepare her for reality. Isabella's voice grew sad again. I don't want her to end up like me, invisible, struggling, cleaning up after people who'll never know her name. Hey, Alexander cupped her face in his hands, thumbs brushing away fresh tears. Don't talk about yourself like that, Isabella. You matter. You matter to Sophia, you matter to the people whose lives you touch every day, and you matter to me. Do you? The question was barely audible. More than you know. And then, because he couldn't help himself, because she was looking at him like he might be the answer to prayers she'd stopped praying, he kissed her. It was soft at first, tentative, a question rather than a demand. But when she kissed him back, when her hands fisted in his shirt and she pressed closer, the gentleness gave way to something deeper. This kiss tasted like hope and desperation, like 2 lonely people finding exactly what they didn't know they were looking for. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Isabella rested her forehead against his. "This is crazy," she whispered. "Completely insane," he agreed. "You barely know me." "I know enough. I know you hum when you're concentrating. I know you save the broken cookies from the break room on your way to your car. I know you love your daughter more than your own life, and I know that when you laugh, it's the most beautiful sound in the world." Isabella's breath caught. Ow. "I know you think your boss is a greedy bastard," he added with a shaky laugh. "And you're probably right. I shouldn't have said that. It was unprofessional. It was honest. And I'm tired of living in a world where no one tells the truth." He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "You tell the truth, Isabella, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts." They talked until dawn crept through the windows, sharing stories and dreams and fears with the easy intimacy of people who'd been waiting their whole lives to be truly seen. Alexander told her about his childhood,
lonely and privileged, shaped by expectations rather than affection. Isabella told him about Sophia's father, who disappeared the moment he learned about the pregnancy, leaving her to build a life from nothing. Do you ever regret it? Having Sophia so young? Having to struggle? Never, Isabella said fiercely. Not once. She saved me, Al. Before Sophia, I was drifting, making bad choices, letting people treat me like I didn't matter. But the moment I held her, I knew I had to become someone worthy of being her mother. Everything I've done since then has been for her. The love in her voice was so pure that it made Alexander's chest ache. When was the last time anyone had spoken about him with even a fraction of that devotion? As they rode the elevator down together, Alexander made a decision that would have seemed impossible a month ago. He was going to tell her the truth. Not tonight. She'd been through enough emotional upheaval, but soon.
Same time tomorrow? Isabella asked as they reached the ground floor. Wouldn't miss it, Alexander said, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. As he watched her walk to her car, exhaustion and hope warring in her posture, Alexander Kane realized he'd never been more terrified or more alive in his life. He was falling in love with a woman who hated everything he represented, and somehow that felt like the most honest thing that had ever happened to him. When have you found the courage to be vulnerable with someone, and how did that moment change your relationship with them? Share if you believe that true love requires the courage to be completely honest, even when that honesty might cost you everything. What would you risk for an authentic connection? Isabella's hands trembled as she stared at the security badge that had fallen from Al's wallet when he'd pulled out money for coffee. The photo was unmistakable. Those same piercing blue eyes, the strong jawline, the face she'd come to love over the past month. But the name beneath made her blood turn to ice. Alexander Kane, Chief Executive Officer. No, she whispered, the badge slipping from her fingers to clatter on the break room floor. No, 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 no. Everything crashed into focus with sickening clarity. The way he'd flinched when she'd called his CEO a greedy bastard. His expensive watch that he'd claimed was a knockoff. He always seemed to have money when she was short for Sophia's medicine, but never asked for it back. The careful way he spoke, as if every word was calculated. The man she'd fallen in love with, the man she'd trusted with her fears, her dreams, her daughter's bedtime stories, was the enemy she'd ranted about for weeks. Izzy, Al's voice came from behind her, and she spun around to face him. For a moment, she saw nothing but the janitor who'd held her when she cried about Sophia's hospital visit, who'd made her laugh until her sides ached, who'd kissed her so tenderly last night that she dared to believe in fairy tales again. Then she saw the truth. The guilt written across his features, the way his expensive shoes, definitely not knockoffs, clicked on the linoleum, the practiced authority in his posture that he'd been hiding behind hunched shoulders and careful humility. How long have you known? Her voice came out steady, which surprised her. Inside, she felt like she was drowning. Izzy, let me explain. How long have you known? Each word was a bullet, fired with precision. Alexander, because that's who he was, had always been, ran a hand through his hair in a gesture she'd found endearing just hours ago. Now it looked like what it was, a rich man's nervous habit. From the beginning, he said quietly. I heard you talking to Keisha that first night about the greedy bastard CEO, and I— You what? Isabella's voice cracked, fury and heartbreak warring in her chest. You thought it would be fun to play with the poor cleaning lady? See how long you could fool the stupid girl who cleans your toilets? It wasn't like that, Alexander stepped forward, but Isabella backed away as if he'd struck her. Then what was it like, Mr. Kane? The title dripped with venom, because from where I'm standing, it looks like a billionaire decided to slum it with the help for a few weeks. Was it entertaining? Did you get off on hearing me worry about paying for my daughter's medication while you have more money than God? I fell in love with you, Alexander said desperately. Everything I felt, everything we shared, that was real.
Real? Isabella laughed, but it was the sound of something breaking. Real is me working 2 jobs to keep my daughter alive. Real is choosing between groceries and medicine. Real is falling asleep every night wondering if I'm good enough, smart enough, strong enough to give Sophia the life she deserves. What do we have? That was a lie wrapped in a janitor's clothes. The feelings weren't a lie. The feelings were based on a lie. Isabella's voice rose, all her careful composure cracking. You want to know what's real? I told you things I've never told anyone. I let you meet my daughter. I let myself fall in love with a man who doesn't exist. She was crying now, angry tears that she wiped away with the back of her hand. Do you know what the worst part is? For 1 month, I felt like I mattered to someone, like I was seen and valued and maybe, just maybe, worthy of love. But it was all pretend, wasn't it? Just Alexander Kane playing dress-up in the real world. Izzy, please, don't. She held up her hand. Don't you dare call me that. You don't get to use the name my friends call me. You don't get to pretend we're still whatever we were. Alexander's face crumpled. What we were was real. I may have lied about my name, my job, but I never lied about caring for you, about loving you.
You lied about everything that matters, Isabella said, her voice breaking. You lied about who you are, what you believe in, what kind of man you are. You let me rant about how much I hate you while you were standing right there. You watched me struggle to pay for my daughter's medicine while you could have solved that problem with pocket change. That's not love, Alexander. That's cruelty. I wanted to help. With what? Your guilt money? Isabella's eyes flashed. Did you think you could just throw some cash at me and I'd be so grateful that I'd overlook the fact that you've been lying to me for weeks? Did you think I'd be so dazzled by your billions that I'd forgive you for making me feel like a fool? The question hung between them like a challenge, and Alexander's silence was answer enough. That's exactly what you thought, Isabella whispered, something dying in her eyes. You thought the poor cleaning lady would be so grateful for scraps from the rich man's table that she'd overlook being treated like a charity case and a joke. Isabella, it wasn't like that. I didn't know how to tell you. The longer it went on, the more impossible it became to treat me like an equal, she finished. Because that's what this is about, isn't it? You can play janitor for a few weeks, but you could never actually be with someone like me. Someone who works with her hands, who didn't go to Harvard, who shops at thrift stores not because it's trendy, but because it's all she can afford. That's not true, isn't it? Isabella picked up the security badge from the floor, holding it between them like evidence. When were you planning to tell me? After you got bored playing in the slums? After you found someone more suitable for your station? Alexander's silence was devastating. Get out, Isabella said quietly. Isabella, please, let me explain. Get out! She screamed the words, months of exhaustion and humiliation and broken dreams exploding out of her like a dam bursting. Get out of here with your lies and your pity and your guilty conscience. Go back to your ivory tower and leave me alone. I love you, Alexander said desperately. No, you don't, Isabella replied, her voice empty now, all the fight gone out of her. You love the idea of me. You love how noble it made you feel to care about the poor girl. You love the fantasy of being a good man without actually having to do the work of becoming one. She walked to the door, then turned back one last time. I trusted you with everything I had. I let you into my daughter's life. I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, I deserved something beautiful. And you took all of that and turned it into a game. Isabella, we're done, Mr. Kane. Go back to your real life and forget the cleaning lady ever existed. It shouldn't be hard. We've been invisible to you in years anyway. The door slammed behind her, leaving Alexander alone in the break room with the shattered remains of the only real thing he'd ever had. And for the first time in his privileged life, Alexander Kane understood what it meant to lose something that actually mattered. Have you ever discovered that someone you trusted was living a lie? How did that change your ability to trust others? Share if you've ever felt betrayed by someone who claimed to love you but couldn't be honest about who they really were.
Sometimes the deepest wounds come from those we trusted most. Alexander Kane sat alone in his penthouse office at 2 a.m., still wearing the janitor's uniform that now felt like a second skin. The city sprawled beneath him through floor-to-ceiling windows, millions of lights representing millions of lives he'd never bothered to consider. In his hands, he held Isabella's security badge, the one she'd thrown at his feet before walking away forever. The weight of it was crushing. 3 hours had passed since she'd discovered his identity, since she'd looked at him with such betrayal and disgust that he'd felt his soul crack open. Her words echoed in the silence. "You're exactly the monster I said you were. Maybe worse, because at least monsters don't pretend to care." She was right. God help me, she was absolutely right. His phone buzzed incessantly with calls from board members, from Patricia, from lawyers trying to manage the crisis of his unauthorized undercover work. He'd ignored them all. For the first time in his adult life, Alexander Kane didn't care about damage control or stock prices or quarterly projections.
He cared about Isabella Rodriguez, the woman who'd shown him what it felt like to be truly seen and accepted for who he was beneath the wealth and power. The woman who'd loved Al Martinez, the man he'd become when stripped of everything that defined his identity. The man he'd discovered he actually wanted to be. But that man was gone now, revealed as a lie, a costume, a cruel deception that had cost him the only real thing in his hollow existence. Alexander opened his laptop and stared at the cursor blinking on a blank document. He could write a memo explaining his actions to the board. He could craft a public statement dismissing the whole thing as market research. He could return to being the CEO Isabella despised and pretend these past weeks had never happened. Or... His fingers trembled as he began to type. To the board of directors of Kane Industries. He stopped, deleted the line, and started again. To Isabella Rodriguez. No, this wasn't about apologies or explanations. This was about choice, about becoming the man who deserved her love, even if it was too late to win it back. Alexander closed the laptop and reached for his phone. But instead of calling his lawyers or his assistant, he dialed a number he'd memorized from Isabella's personnel file. Sofia Rodriguez Children's Hospital? Came a tired voice. I need to speak to someone about setting up a medical fund for asthma patients who can't afford their medications. 30 minutes later, he'd committed $2 million to ensuring no child at Sofia's hospital would ever go without their medication again. It wasn't about buying forgiveness. It was about doing what should have been done years ago. His second call was to Marcus, the night shift supervisor. Mr. Kane? Marcus's voice was confused and slightly panicked. Sir, it's the middle of the night. I know what time it is. I need you to gather all the night shift employees tomorrow morning, every single one. And Marcus, I need you to trust me on something. Can you do that? There's a long pause. Yes, sir. Good. And Marcus, call them employees, not the help. They're employees. His third call was to Patricia. Sir, thank goodness. I've been trying to reach you for hours. We need to discuss how to spin this. Patricia, I said quietly, draft my resignation letter. Silence stretched across the line. Sir? You heard me. I'm resigning as CEO, effective immediately. Sir, you can't be serious. One woman's opinion. It's not one woman's opinion, Alexander said, thinking of every night shift worker who'd looked through him like he was made of glass, every employee survey that had gone unread, every human cost of his business decisions. It's the truth I've been too arrogant to see. What will you do? Alexander looked down at the janitor's uniform, at the name tag that read Al. For the first time in weeks, he smiled. I'm going to learn how to be the man Isabella thought she was falling in love with. Meanwhile, 23 floors below, Isabella sat in the employee break room staring at her phone. Sophia's picture smiled back at her, gap-toothed and radiant, unaware that her mother's world had imploded tonight. Mama called, texted her sister Maria. She wants to know why you're not answering your phone. Also, the hospital called. Something about Sophia's medication being covered by a new program. Isabella's breath caught. A new program? At 2 a.m.? That was impossible unless... Her phone rang. The number was blocked.
Isabella? The voice was achingly familiar. Alex's voice, not the commanding CEO tone she'd heard in his office, but the gentle cadence of Al Martinez, the man who cheered his lunch with her, who'd listened to her dreams and fears without judgment. Don't, she whispered. Whatever you're going to say, just don't. Sophia's medication is taken care of, he said simply. There's a new medical fund at Children's Hospital. She'll never have to go without again. I don't want your money. It's not for you, Alexander said, his voice breaking slightly. It's for every child like Sophia, every parent like you who shouldn't have to choose between medicine and groceries. It should have existed years ago. Isabella closed her eyes, hating how her heart still jumped at the sound of his voice, hating how much she wanted to believe in the man she'd fallen in love with. That doesn't change what you did. That doesn't change the lie. You're right, he admitted. It doesn't. But Isabella, the man you knew, Al Martinez, he wasn't completely a liar. He was who I am when I stopped being afraid, when I stopped hiding behind money and power and the expectations of a life I never chose. So which one is real? Isabella asked, tears streaming down her face. The line was quiet for so long she thought he'd hung up. I don't know, Alexander finally said, but I know which one I want to be, and I know which one loved you more than his own life. Isabella's hand tightened on the phone. Alex, he said quietly, I resigned tonight. From everything. I'm stepping down as CEO. You can't do that. I already did, because you were right about everything, Isabella. I was a greedy bastard who didn't see the people right in front of me, but you saw something else in Al Martinez, something worth loving. And if there's any chance that man is real, if there's any possibility he could earn your forgiveness... He trailed off, leaving the question hanging between them like a bridge neither knew how to cross.
Isabella pressed her hand to her chest, feeling her heart fracture in entirely new ways. The man on the phone sounded broken, humbled, real in a way that Alexander Kane had never been. But could she trust it? Could she trust him? Could she trust herself? I need time, she whispered. I know. I'll wait. However long it takes, Isabella, I'll wait. The line went dead, leaving Isabella alone with the most impossible choice of her life. Hold on to her righteous anger or risk her heart on the possibility that love could transform even the most unlikely soul. Outside the break room windows, dawn was breaking over Chicago, painting the sky in shades of hope and possibility. When someone has deeply hurt you, but shown genuine remorse and change, how do you decide whether to risk trusting them again? Share this if you believe people can truly change when love shows them who they could become. What's the most transformative choice you've ever made? 3 weeks later, Alexander Kane stood in the service elevator, wearing a janitor's uniform that felt like a costume from another life. The navy blue shirt with Al embroidered on the pocket hung loose on his frame, and the work boots felt foreign after years of Italian leather. But for the first time in months, his heart was beating with something other than corporate deadlines. It had been Patricia's offhand comment that sparked the idea. "Sir, The employee satisfaction surveys are concerning. They're saying management is completely disconnected from the workforce. He dismissed it initially. Surveys were just numbers, and numbers could be manipulated. But the words had planted a seed of doubt that grew into desperate curiosity. Who was Alexander Kane when stripped of his title, his wealth, his power? When no one knew his name or his bank account balance? When he was just, ow. The elevator dinged softly as it reached the 20th floor. His hands, manicured hands that had never held a mop, trembled slightly as he gripped the cleaning cart handle. This was insane. CEOs didn't play janitor. But maybe that was exactly the problem. "You must be the new guy," a warm voice called from behind him. Alexander turned, and the world tilted on its axis. Isabella Rodriguez stood in the hallway, her cleaning cart positioned beside a conference room door. Even in the unflattering fluorescent light, she was stunning. Not in the polished, artificial way of the women in his usual circles, but in a real, unguarded way that hit him like a physical blow. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, a few rebellious curls escaping to frame her face. Her brown eyes held a wariness that spoke of too many disappointments, but when she smiled, everything else faded away. "Yeah," he managed, his voice rougher than usual. Al Martinez." The lie came easier than he'd expected. "Isabella," she said, extending a work-worn hand. "But everyone calls me Izzy. First night on executive?" Her touch sent electricity up his arm. Her palm was calloused, real, honest, so different from the soft, pampered hands he was used to. "First night anywhere, actually." Isabella's smile widened, transforming her entire face. "Fresh meat, huh? Don't worry, it's not as scary as it looks up here. Rich people make the same messes as everyone else. They just do it with more expensive stuff." There was something in her tone, a hint of resentment wrapped in humor, that made Alexander's chest tighten. "You don't like working for rich people?" "Like has nothing to do with it," Isabella said, pulling disinfectant from her cart with practiced efficiency. "It's work, and work pays bills. But sometimes," she paused, glancing around the empty hallway as if checking for eavesdroppers. "Sometimes I wonder what it would be like to matter to them, to be seen as more than just the invisible hands that make their world shine." The words hit him like a confession he wasn't meant to hear. "Have you ever talked to any of them? The executives, I mean?" Isabella laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Honey, I've been working nights for 2 years, and I could probably count on one hand how many times someone above a supervisor's even looked at me. We're furniture to them. Necessary furniture, but furniture all the same." "That's not—" she started, but caught himself. "That's not true," he'd about to say, but how would Al Martinez know what was true about executive behavior? "Not what?" Isabella asked, tilting her head with genuine curiosity. Not right," he finished lamely. "People should be treated better than that." "Should be and are two different things," Isabella said softly, spraying down a conference table that probably cost more than her yearly salary. "But I appreciate the sentiment. Most people who end up on night shift are here because they've learned not to expect too much." They worked in companionable silence for several minutes, moving through the conference room with an easy rhythm that surprised Alexander. He found himself watching Isabella's every movement, the careful way she handled expensive equipment, the thoroughness of her work, the small unconscious hum she made when concentrating.
"You have kids?" he asked, though he wasn't sure why. Isabella's entire demeanor softened. "A daughter. Sophia. She's 8, and she's—" Isabella paused, her voice catching slightly. "She's everything. Smart as a whip, funny, brave. Sometimes I think she's raising me instead of the other way around. She sounds amazing." She is. Isabella's voice was fierce with pride, then shadowed with worry. She's also asthmatic, and her medications cost more than I make most weeks. But we manage. We always manage. The casual way she mentioned financial struggle, as if it were just another fact of life, like the weather, made Alexander's throat constrict. He thought about the wine in his penthouse that cost more than her daughter's medication, about the casual way he'd approve the company's budget cuts without considering faces like Isabella's. The company should have better health benefits, he said quietly. Kane Industries? Isabella snorted. That greedy bastard wouldn't notice if his own mother was scrubbing these floors. All he cares about is his next million. He froze, a spray bottle halfway to his hand. The words hit him like physical blows, each syllable carefully articulated in Isabella's clear voice. Greedy bastard. The venom in her tone was unmistakable, and the worst part was how matter-of-fact it sounded, not like an insult, but like a simple statement of truth. You don't know him personally, he managed, his voice barely steady. Don't need to, Isabella said, warming to her subject, as she scrubbed with more vigor. Read about him in Forbes last month. 35 years old, inherited most of his money from daddy, never worked a real day in his life, made $3 billion in profit last quarter while laying off 800 people right before Christmas. You know what that tells me about his character? Alexander stood frozen in the shadows by the door, invisible in his janitor's uniform, as the woman he was falling for systematically destroyed every comfortable lie he'd told himself about who he was. The spray bottle slipped from his numb fingers, clattering to the floor. Isabella looked up, concerned. Al, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. I am the ghost, he thought desperately. The ghost of the man I thought I was? The ghost of the leader I believed myself to be? The ghost of someone worth loving? I'm fine, he lied, his voice hollow as his chest. Just tired. But he wasn't fine. He was shattered, broken open by 23 words from a woman who didn't even know she'd just delivered the most honest performance review of his life. And the terrifying part was that she might be right. When was the last time someone's honest opinion of you completely shattered your self-perception? How did you respond? Share this if you've ever discovered that the person you thought you were wasn't who others saw. What did you do with that painful truth? 6 months later, the Kane Industries mobby had been transformed. Gone were the cold marble surfaces and intimidating corporate portraits. In their place stood warm wood accents, comfortable seating areas, and a wall dedicated to employee achievements. Real faces, real stories, real people who mattered. But the most significant change wasn't visible in the decor. Isabella Rodriguez Kane adjusted her new wedding ring, a simple platinum band that meant more than all the diamonds in Tiffany's, as she walked through the building she now partially owned. Not because Alexander had insisted, but because she earned it. Her employee advocacy program had revolutionized the company culture, and her business degree, completed with Alexander's proud support, had proven she was as brilliant as he always known. Mrs. Kane, called James from security, tipping his hat with genuine warmth. How's Sophia adjusting to the new school? Loves it, especially the science lab you helped to design. She's convinced she's going to be the first astronaut to cure asthma in space. Their laughter echoed through the lobby, the sound of a workplace where people actually knew each other, where the CEO's stepdaughter's dreams mattered as much as quarterly profits.
Alexander looked up, and the love in his eyes still took her breath away. Not the desperate need she'd seen that first night when Al Martinez had been born from loneliness and lies, but the steady, sure love of a man who'd found his purpose. "How did the board meeting go?" he asked, rising to kiss her cheek. "They approved the scholarship program unanimously," Isabella said, unable to keep the pride from her voice. "Full college tuition for employees' children, plus mentoring and internship opportunities." "That's my brilliant wife," Alexander murmured against her temple.
changing the world one life at a time. Our world, she corrected softly. We're changing our world. Sophia looked up from her volcano, her dark eyes, so like her mother's, sparkling with mischief. Are you two going to be mushy again? Because I need to concentrate on my science. They laughed, and Alexander ruffled Sophia's hair. Wouldn't dream of it, kiddo. This volcano is serious business. As they worked together, CEO, cleaning lady turned executive, and future astronaut scientist, Isabella's mind drifted back to that night 6 months ago when her world had shattered and rebuilt itself. After the revelation in the parking lot, after the tears and the truth and the terrible, beautiful vulnerability of two people choosing love over fear, Alexander had done something unprecedented. He'd listened. Not just to her words, but to her heart. Not just to her pain, but to her solutions. The company-wide healthcare expansion had been Isabella's idea. The child care center on the 3rd floor, Sophia's suggestion during a family dinner. The employee profit-sharing program, the flexible scheduling, the mental health resources, all born from conversations around their kitchen table where a billionaire learned to see his business through the eyes of the people who made it run. Earth to Isabella, Alexander teased, waving a hand in front of her face. You're doing that thing where you get all philosophical. Just thinking about how different everything is, she said softly. Different how? Isabella looked around the conference room, the same room where she'd once scrubbed tables in invisible silence. Now it hosted her employee welfare meetings, Sophia's homework sessions, and impromptu family moments that would have been unthinkable in the old Kane industries. Remember when you asked me what I wanted most in the world? She said. Alexander nodded, his expression growing serious. It had been during one of their late-night conversations in those precious weeks when Al Martinez fell in love with Isabella Rodriguez, before the truth complicated everything. I said I wanted Sophia to grow up in a world where her dreams weren't limited by our bank account. And now? Isabella smiled, watching Sophia carefully drop food coloring into her volcano mixture, her face scrunched in concentration. The same little girl who once went without medicine now attended the finest private school in Chicago, not because of charity, but because her mother had fought for and earned the opportunities that made it possible. Alexander's eyes grew suspiciously bright. And what do you want now? Isabella stepped closer, her hand finding his. Their wedding rings clinked softly together, a sound that still made her heart skip. Now I want to keep building this world we've created, together. Forever? Alexander asked, echoing the words he'd whispered 6 months ago when he'd proposed in the same janitor closet where they'd first kissed. Forever, Isabella confirmed, just as Sophia's volcano erupted in a spectacular explosion of foam and food coloring, filling the conference room with the sound of scientific success and pure joy. Later that evening, after Sophia had been tucked into bed in their penthouse apartment, redecorated to feel like a home instead of a museum, Alexander and Isabella stood on the balcony overlooking the city lights. Do you ever miss it? The simplicity of being just Al Martinez? Alexander considered this, his arm tightening around her waist. I miss the honesty of that time. The way you looked at me when I was nobody special.
But you were special, Isabella said, turning in his arms. You were special because you chose to listen. You were special because you chose to change. You were special because when I told you the truth about your greedy bastard boss, you didn't get defensive. You got better. We got better, Alexander corrected, echoing her earlier words. All of us.
They stood in comfortable silence, watching their city, their company, their family, their life sparkle beneath the stars. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to prove that love and business could coexist, that profit and purpose weren't mutually exclusive. But tonight, they had this: the quiet satisfaction of dreams fulfilled and love freely given. Isabella had found her voice and her power. Alexander had found his heart and his purpose. Sophia had found a father who loved her dreams as much as her mother did. And in the building below them, security guards and executives, janitors and board members would arrive tomorrow to a workplace where everyone mattered, everyone belonged, and everyone had the chance to build something beautiful together. Love, as it turned out, was the most transformative business strategy of all. What would change in your life if you dared to love and be loved without conditions or pretenses? Share this story if you believe that authentic love has the power to transform not just relationships, but entire communities. What barriers would you tear down for the right person?
You've come to the end of this love story, but another billionaire's secret is waiting. The next tale will be more seductive, more forbidden, and far more addictive. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one. Until then, guard your heart, because the Powder Room Tales is only getting started.